All right, so for the last 2 weeks, we have been discussing the structure of the Gospel of Mark and how it points to the main theme that the Messiah, the one who has come to save the world from our sins and to free us from the power of sin and death, will accomplish this purpose and overcome death through suffering. Now, the first half of the Gospel of Mark we talked about moves quickly through the ministry of Jesus, skipping over his birth and beginning with the baptism of Jesus, followed by his teaching, miracles, and healings, all of which caused offense and concern for the religious leaders at that time. And during this first half of the Gospel of Mark, as questions and ideas about Jesus' identity are whispered around him in the crowds, he regularly tells people to keep the fact that he is the Messiah a secret. And today, as we reach Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 27, Jesus, for the first time, confirms to his disciples that he is the Messiah and reveals to them that he must suffer. Today, as we reach Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 27, Jesus for the first time confirms to his disciples, yes, I am the Messiah, and reveals to them that he must suffer. And after days of teaching that included feeding a crowd of 4,000 people, and after healing a man who was blind, Jesus and his disciples, along with a crowd who was following them, were on their way to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. Now, this is important because this is the region where it was the center of pagan worship and the Roman imperial cult. And as they were walking, Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered that some say he is John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. And Jesus then asks them, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter, in one of his greatest moments of faith, says, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus then tells them not to tell anyone, confirming to them that he is, in fact, the Messiah. Now, I imagine when Jesus confirms, "Yes, I am the Messiah," that in that moment, the hearts of the disciples begin to race a little bit. That they begin to taste the victory that they would expect, that they would experience at his side. That they start to have visions of their enemies being defeated, of the hearts of the people turning back to God, and their nation being restored. And that those visions start to formulate in their minds. But before they could fully come into focus, Jesus revealed the biggest secret of all. The Messiah was going to suffer many things. The religious leaders who were growing increasingly angry would become violent and have him killed. But after 3 days, he would rise again. It says he spoke clearly and openly about this. Now remember, up to this point, a lot of his teaching in the Gospel of Mark has been in parables that he then explains to the disciples later. But here, he is in stories. A lot of them are in stories that people don't always understand and are a little bit confusing, but then he would explain it to his disciples later. But here, it says that he spoke clearly, that it was plain. He spoke clearly and openly about the fact that he would suffer, that he would die, and that in 3 days he would rise again. Now, Peter, after having such a beautiful moment of faith, can't believe what he's hearing. I imagine his heart that was racing now drops to the ground. That taste of victory that he had turns sour. And the visions of enemies being defeated that were forming in his mind disappear. And out of despair, Peter takes Jesus aside and he starts to scold him, to rebuke him. And as Peter is angry with him, with Jesus, and is telling him, "No, this cannot be," it says Jesus turns his face away and looks at his disciples. He turned his face to his disciples. And I wonder, what was he thinking as he looked at his disciples? Was he filled with love for them? Was he sad because he knew all that they were going to go through together? Whatever he experienced as he looked at them, it caused him to say to Peter in the strongest language, "Get behind me, Satan. You are not thinking about the things of God, the things that God cares about. Instead, you are thinking only about the things humans care about." Why does he say Satan? Peter's not Satan, obviously. So why does he say, "Get behind me, Satan"? If we remember, Satan is the great deceiver and the accuser, the one who twists the word of God as he tempts us to waver in our trust in the presence and love of God, and tempts us to follow instead our own path, a path that looks a little bit easier, a path that looks like it might be a little more successful. Satan also accuses us before God and says that what we are doing is wrong. And Peter is doing both of those things in this moment. He is tempting Jesus to stray from the path that is set before him. And he is accusing Jesus of doing the wrong thing. So Jesus knew the path before him that God had determined. Here on this road that led to the region where many were deceived by Satan and worshiped other gods and even the emperor, Satan was using one of Jesus' closest friends to pull him away from the path set before him, the way established by God, and instead to focus on the ways of humans. Peter wanted Jesus to turn away from suffering and embrace victory. He wanted him to keep his own life. Jesus, live, be victorious, even if it cost the lives of their enemies, I would say. Now, after rebuking Peter, Jesus called the crowds and the disciples to them and explained in chapter 8, verse 34, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must say no to themselves. They must pick up their cross and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the good news will save it. What good is it if someone gains the whole world but loses their soul? Or what can anyone trade for their soul? Suppose anyone is ashamed of me and my words among these adulterous and sinful people. Then the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." Now, I want to be clear that Jesus' command to say no to ourselves or to deny ourselves is not a command to suffer for the sake of suffering. It is a command to say yes to God, even if that path includes suffering. Jesus did not seek out suffering. He did not seek out mistreatment, injustice, or even his own death. He wasn't going and looking for those things. But when it was clear that it was the path that was set before him, he accepted it and was not ashamed when it looked like he failed and was defeated by his enemies. The cross that he was going to suffer and die on was meant to publicly shame the person who was killed. That was the purpose of it. But Jesus makes it clear that he will not be ashamed in front of those who will harm him. Instead, his focus is on his Father's glory and the holy angels in the heavenly realm who are witnessing his faithfulness. This is also what is expected of us who follow Jesus. Now, this is the point in Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, midway through, where the veil is lifted, where the secret is revealed. It's the climax or the main point, the center point of the gospel. Jesus is the Messiah, and the Messiah's victory will come through suffering. In Mark chapter 9, it says that 6 days later, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John with him up a mountain. Now, mountains in Scripture signify the place where heaven and earth meet. If you recall, Moses meets with God on the mountain. Elijah, fearful for his life, runs to God on the mountain. So in the Jewish mind of that time, mountains are places where you go to seek the presence of God. And so Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up this mountain. Theologian N.T. Wright notes that for the ancient Jewish people, the heavenly realm and the earthly realm are not separated by thousands of miles, like we talked about this morning in our discussion, No, the heavenly realm is considered to be in the skies. It is close to the earth. It is simply hidden from the human eye, like a veil is covering it. In creation, heaven and earth are integrated. They're one. The heavenly realm and the earthly realm are together. But Adam and Eve chose their own path instead of the path that God had established for them. And in their attempt to gain their own lives, they lost their lives, and all of creation was impacted. Heaven and earth were separated, or more accurately, heaven was veiled, and humans could no longer see into the heavenly realm unless God chose to reveal it. So, for example, in 2 Kings chapter 6, when the servant of the prophet Elijah woke up, Elisha, he saw that the city was surrounded by an army with chariots, and he was afraid because this massive army of people was around them, and he was fearing for their lives. So he goes to the prophet Elisha, who tells him, "Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills were full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. The heavenly realm became visible. God lifted the veil from the servant's eyes to see the truth of what was happening. Now, when Jesus, Peter, James, and John reached the top of the mountain, that symbolic place where the earthly and heavenly realms meet, Jesus' body is transfigured. It changes, and his clothes become bright. So bright that no one on earth could possibly make them any brighter, is what the text says. And then there's Elijah and Moses there talking with Jesus. The veil has been lifted, and Peter, James, and John, they can see all of this. They can see into this heavenly realm, and they're terrified. And Peter, not knowing what to do, but always needing to do something, offers to make 3 tents. Now, what are tents? They're dwelling places. Places for people to remain, to stay. And he says, "Hey, how about we make 3 tents? One for Moses, one for Elijah, one for Jesus. We can just stay here." And then a cloud overshadowed them, symboling the presence of God. And a voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son. I love him. Listen to him." Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Just a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the baptism of Jesus, didn't we hear those exact same words? And if you remember, those words are echoes of a Psalm of David about the Messiah and the words of the prophet Isaiah that revealed that the Messiah would suffer. And suddenly, when they look around, when the 3 disciples look around, they don't see Moses and Elijah anymore. The veil was back in place, and all that they see is Jesus. So what's happening here in this whole transfiguration? It's the middle of the Gospel of Mark. What's going on? Why is this so important? Why is this happening? Why Moses and Elijah? Jesus had just revealed that he was going to die. And he turns his face toward Jerusalem and the suffering and the death he is going to experience that will lead to the ultimate victory of life over death. And like Moses and like Elijah, he goes up a mountain to meet with God and finds strength. He is greeted by both of them, and he enters the heavenly realm where he is changed. He appears different. Moses, Elijah, and Jesus begin to talk, is what it says. I wonder what they talked about. Were Moses and Elijah giving Jesus courage? Were they reminding him of the mission that God began through them, that Jesus was going to complete? Now, Peter's response to witnessing them in the heavenly realm, again, was to say, let's just stay here. This is comfortable. But Jesus, like Elijah, had more work to do after being reaffirmed in his call and reminded that he was not alone. Jesus is now reaffirmed as the Messiah who is loved by his Father, and he has been reminded that he is not alone. So he starts down the path that God has for him, entering once again into the earthly realm to bring peace and hope. It's important to note that Moses represents all of the law, and Elijah represents all of the prophets. And when the veil is lowered again, only Jesus remains. Now remember the question that a religious leader asked Jesus about the greatest commandment? The conclusion was that to love God with everything we are and to love our neighbor as ourselves is what all of the law and all of the prophets was all about. So when that veil separating the heavenly realm and the earthly realm was put back in place, Peter, James, and John could only see Jesus. And when they saw Jesus, they saw the Messiah who fulfills all of the law and the prophets, doing what Adam and Eve and every human after them failed to do. And this Messiah was about to demonstrate God's love through offering his life for the forgiveness of sins and the reconciliation of all things. Just as Elijah, after being reaffirmed in his call and reminded that he was not alone, he was sent from the mountain to continue the work. There was more work to be done. And as they went down from the mountain, Jesus once again told them to keep what they had seen to themselves. But this time, he adds, until after the Son of Man is risen from the dead. There will be a time for them to proclaim who Jesus is and what they saw when Jesus is victorious over death. So 2,000 years later, here we are in this community room in the Sol Naciente apartment complex in Fort Morgan, Colorado. What does this mean for us as we reflect on what happened on that day? Salvadoran Archbishop Oscar Romero, in a homily he gave in the year that I was born, which I'm not going to tell you what year that was, urged the people of God to be transfigured as Christ was transfigured, to become like Christ. He said that as we become like Christ, like Jesus, we will challenge the beliefs and the values of the way of humankind, which will, unfortunately, lead to conflict. It's impossible because the ways of humankind and the ways of God are not in agreement with one another. And like Elisha's servants, we will see all around us violence, suffering, lies, disregard for human life. We see it on full display in people who hold the highest positions on earth, and at times we see it in our own hearts when we, like Peter, insist on our own path instead of the path that has been established by God for us. We need God's vision. We need the veil to be lifted to see the spiritual reality around us. And as that veil is lifted, we are reminded of all the people of God who have gone before us. The author of the book of Hebrews lists many people of God who responded to God in faith and followed the path that he set for them, even in the midst of their doubts. And after listing all of these people, the author of the book of Hebrews says, a huge cloud of witnesses is all around us. We were talking this morning during discussion about how the spiritual realm is always present. We just don't see it. Can we imagine in this moment, just take a minute, the people who have gone before us, who have faithfully followed Christ? We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. We are being cheered on by a great cloud of witnesses. As Moses and Elijah encouraged Jesus, we should also draw courage from those who have gone before. And it says, so let us throw off everything that stands in our way. Let us throw off any sin that holds on to us tightly. Let us throw it off. And let us keep on running the race that is marked out for us. It's not just any race. Your race is not my race. The things that God has for you are not necessarily the things that God has for me. There are definitely things he has for us together. But the point is that to continue in that path, sin is going to cling to us. Sin is going to try to entangle us, to trip us up. And we are to be with one another and together to throw off that sin, to keep on running the race marked out for us. There is work to be done, but it is not work that we do on our own. We are encouraged by those who have gone before us, and we go together to complete this work. So as we reflect on this center point of the Gospel of Mark, 3 things become clear. The first one is vision. Jesus and the 3 disciples are given vision. They see the spiritual reality of what is happening in the moment. They see beyond the earthly realm into the heavenly realm. Second, Jesus is reaffirmed in his mission and encouraged that he is not alone. And third, this is the tipping point of the Gospel of Mark. As they walk down the mountain, they enter into the final week of Jesus' earthly life. A choice has been made. We need vision. We need to see the world as God sees the world. So what does this have to do with us? We need to see Fort Morgan the way that God sees Fort Morgan. We need to see our homes the way that God sees our homes, our lives the way that God sees our lives. We can take courage. We can take courage in the people of God who have gone before us and each other, those who are with us. And we must make a decision. Will we say yes to the path that God has established for us? And if we do, like Jesus, this is both a single decision, a monumental decision in our life, and a decision that is made every day until we have completed the work that God has for us. I'm reminded of Joshua's challenge found in Joshua chapter 24. But suppose you don't want to serve God. Then choose for yourselves right now whom you will serve. You can choose the gods of your people, served east of the Euphrates River, or you can serve the gods of the Amorites. After all, you're living in their land. We could serve the gods of our society, of consumerism, materialism, whatever else, isolationism, my community is the best, my culture is the best, whatever it might be. We could serve those gods because after all, this is where we live. Or Joshua says, as for me and my family, we will serve Yahweh. We will serve the Lord. So as we close, I want us to be thinking about how each day we choose who we follow. Each day we choose which path we're going to walk on. May we have eyes that see the spiritual reality surrounding us. May we take courage in our brothers and sisters who've gone before us and in one another. And may we choose together to throw off any sin that holds on to us tightly, that we would keep on running the race that he has marked out for us.